Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. Yeah, it's not much of a day, but I'm out again this morning for a couple of hours just with a buddy of mine. We're going to use the Gold Monster 1000. Just keep it easy, don't need to cart anything around that's too heavy today. We've only got a couple of hours. So we're out in a spot where I've been to several times with the Monster and found quite a bit of gold, so I'm hopeful that we should be able to get onto something. Yeah, let's see how we go. So most of the gold that that's very pretty. Most of the gold that I've found in this area has been in quartz. Hasn't been much free mill gold, so I expect that if we do find anything, it will be in quartz. As we move along today, I'd love to share, as it starts to rain, as we move along today, I would love to share a story that many of you may not be aware of, a story that I wasn't aware of until maybe 3 years ago, and it's got to do with bush rangers for those adventurers out there that are interested in that. Really beautiful plants below me here, I'll show you guys in a sec. As a lot of you may be becoming aware, I'm fairly interested in the adventure of the gold rush, and the gold in some ways is secondary to that, so I'm really keen to share this story with you, but I'll talk about that in a minute. We'll see if we can find some gold first, but I'll show you these flowers. So, found my first bit. Probably the smallest bit of gold I've ever found in my life. I don't think that would even register on the scales, but as I've said before, for all those people out there using the gold monsters, stick it out. It's a really good machine for the tiny, tiny bits of gold, of which there are plenty out there, if you find the right spot. So, piece number one. True to form, Alice is outdoing me with the detecting. He's got a little target in here. Let's see what it is. He's only down about 8 foot, so there's a good chance. There's a good chance this could be gold. It's got a good poker face. It's quartz, is it? Guess so.
Got to be in there somewhere.
Yep, I can see just a little bit on the end there. Don't know if it'll show up on the camera. Right on the end. Good job, mate. I better start doing some detecting instead of talking. How many are you up to now?
3, I think.
3, alright.
This fucking rock, which it's going off somewhere, but I can't.
Right. Alright, it's 3 love. Got some work to do.
There's something in there?
Yeah, I'm sure there is. Okie doke. Well, you might be able to tell, but I do have you leaning up against a tree because I broke a second tripod when I was out prospecting a few weeks ago. And it was the same tripod that I broke the first time, the same model. So it's probably more my fault at this stage. So I wanted to start this story about bushrangers. You know, when you think about bushrangers, I guess the name that comes to mind for everyone is probably Ned Kelly, right? And Ned Kelly certainly is a pretty infamous and famous bushranger in Victoria and Australian history. But I wanted to talk about some different bushrangers, obviously. And these guys predate Ned Kelly. And I learnt about these guys a couple of years ago when I was reading a book on Bendigo history. I can't remember the name of the author. I'll try and put it in the description of this video for those people that want to read more about it. So these two bushrangers date back to the mid-1830s. So this is when Victoria was still, well, Victoria wasn't Victoria. Victoria was still part of New South Wales at that time. And those of you, I think 1851 was when Victoria became its own state, for a variety of reasons, namely the gold rush. But anyway, yeah, so the mid-1830s was when these two bushrangers were prevalent, and the two names are George Comerford and Joseph Dignam. George Comerford and Joseph Dignam. So both of these guys were convicts. They were sent out to Australia. George for minor crimes, I believe, and Joseph, he was a pretty dangerous guy. George Comerford, he was described as, he was 22, I think, when he came out to the colonies. And he was described as a handsome, effeminate guy. Yeah. Wouldn't be the type that you would associate. And that is what happens when you put your phone against a tree. So yeah, George wasn't, he's described as a pretty regular looking guy. Now Joseph Dignam, on the other hand, he was described as a pretty dangerous looking character. I think when I read through the book, it was something like fierce in appearance and fierce in character. So Joseph Dignam, George Comerford, they're the two guys I want to tell you about. Okie doke. Well, I've just sort of scraped down this little area here, probably, I don't know, 1.5 meters by 1 meter. And I've got this little target here. It's just this bit of quartz. And give you guys a listen. Sorry about the focus. So yep, there'll be a little bit of gold in there. Can't see any, it's pretty dirty though. So yeah, that's number 2 for the day, which is good. And not to sound like every other single person who gives out advice when it comes to prospecting, this little what is it, little nail, little tack, I found that like pretty much 1/2 inch to the side of the quartz. So it goes without saying, just double check. If you do get a target and it's junk, we all get frustrated and want to move on, but yeah, the amount of times that you do find gold next to trash, it's a fair bit. So try and be persistent if you can, and if you can't, well, just walk away, because I've also done that a million times too. So you might ask yourself, why do I care about these two fellas, these two bushrangers? Well, I care because they're a big part of Bendigo and Mount Alexander's history, which may come as a surprise to you if for those of you who don't know this story. So Joseph and George, as I said, both convicts, they absconded pretty quickly after getting out to the colonies. They were like, I'm not that keen on being a convict and being locked up and breaking rocks and building walls. So they absconded and they met up. They both became shepherds, and they pretty much went on a spree of robbing people that were camping along the roads, going into small settlements and robbing people, and moving down from what is now New South Wales into Port Phillip. Now, it was here in Port Phillip where things started to get a little bit hairy. Now, by this point, George and Joseph had buddied up with another 7 convicts, and were causing a fair bit of havoc. And even for the limited amount of police that were available at the time, they were getting a bit of a name for themselves. So things got pretty hot for George and Joseph. So what they decided to do was to make legs and head for South Australia. This is a beautiful little plant here. I think it's related to that other plant. The leaf looks like a similar colour. So they head off to South Australia in the hope that heat would die down, off with their 7 mates. So rather than go straight for South Australia, they decided to go inland, where there would be hopefully less police presence. And what do they stumble across? Well, they stumble across Mount Alexander. And this is where the story gets a little bit dark. Sorry for wrecking your home, buddy. Take some shelter in there. So at this part of the story, I'd probably not recommend children listening, probably from here on out. So our two mates, George, Joseph, and their 7 buddies, they track it inland to Mount Alexander, and they're not overly prepared. And what they realise pretty quickly, once they get out to the sticks, is that they don't have enough rations for everybody who's taking the journey. And there's also reports of some pretty significant disputes about which way to go. Like, what the hell are we doing here at Mount Alexander? It's going to take us a long time to get to South Australia if we go this way. So there was a lot of unrest. So our friends George and Joseph, they decide to camp at Mount Alexander with their 7 buddies, and then make a decision in the morning. Well, I've got this bit of sandstone here that I've just pulled out of this hole, and you can see it's got this beautiful quartz seam running through it. Now, when I swing over it in this section here, I'm getting like a solid target. Now, it could just be some mineralisation. I've got my headphones in, so you guys won't be able to hear it, but I'll show you the screen. So it's a bit back and forth, but I'm curious about it, so I'm not going to bore you by showing you the whole process, but I'm going to smash this bit up and see if there's anything in it. That'd be pretty cool if there was, but let's see what happens. Well, I was starting to get pretty excited because when I busted that rock open, it had this line of quartz running through it, and I thought it might be in this, but the more I break up the pieces, the more the targets disappear. Like, if I wanted to be really curious, I could probably take some of this home and crush it up, and I would be very, very surprised if there wasn't, you know, at least some fine pieces of gold in here, but it's probably not worth my time for today, so maybe something for another day, but I'll keep working along. So just scratching around a little bit more, and another piece here in this heavily mineralized bit of quartz. I thought it was up here, but it's just a little bit of wattle, I think, that's fallen off. Give you guys a listen. So not a bad little target in there. That's number 3 for the day, so that's okay. Keep moving along. So my boys George and Joseph, they go to bed with their mates. They roll down their tarps, sleeping under the stars, and they all go off to bed. They all go off to sleep, but one of these characters doesn't, and that is Joseph. Joseph does not sleep. Joseph is paranoid and he's afraid, and at least if you read the text, that's what it talks about. Now Joseph, he comes up with a plan somewhere on that night that he's going to kill and execute the other members of his gang, and he thinks about how he might do it. He's got an axe, and he's got a rifle. Now, so Joseph is being designated somewhat as a leader of this gang, but his second in command is George. So he notices that George is tossing and turning, so he decides, in order to try and pull this off, that he might have a chat with George and see if he's on board. And he gets George to agree. So Joseph and George, they take their axe and their gun and they execute, one at a time, these 7 men. Now 4 of them, it's reported, are killed instantly with the axe over the head. And then the 3 others are reported to be killed by rifle. Pretty dark stuff. And George and Joseph then take these 7 bodies, and they pile them up against a log that's fallen over, and they set it on fire, and they burn the bodies, Lord of the Rings style. Pretty awful, and something that I'd be curious, like, put it in the comments below if you've heard of this story before. You can find it online if you search up George Comerford and Joseph Dignam and Mount Alexander. So anyway, they execute these guys. There's a bit of a squabble as to what they should do next, and Joseph, in a panic, the next day takes a shot at George, misses. It's reported that George then runs to Port Phillip Bay, or Melbourne, and Joseph, he takes off for South Australia. So while I've been telling ghost stories, Alice has actually been putting in the hard yards and searching for gold, and he's found these 2 little pieces here that are quite gorgeous, still in the host rock there. So I'm happy for you, Alice. Not? No, good stuff. That's awesome. So George gets to Port Phillip, and petrified, he decides to actually turn himself in. He becomes convinced that Joseph is going to come after him and kill him. So he turns himself into authorities, and they go, "Come on, mate, turn it up." They don't believe him. So what happens next is George and I think 3 constables. He's escorted by 3 constables back to Mount Alexander because they want physical evidence to corroborate his story. Now, I'll try and remember this as best as I can. They get to the spot. George shows them the pile of bodies that are now burnt, with some of their remains, obviously buckles and whatnot attached. So the story is corroborated, and they're amazed. And then they head back to Port Phillip, so George and the 3 constables, and they discover the next morning when they leave to come back to Port Phillip, they discover that they've left their tea at their original campsite. So I do not understand why, but I think what happens next is 2 of the constables go back to fetch the tea and leave one of the other constables with George. Now, George, he's an opportunist. He knows this is not going to end well for him. So this constable, I think, is taking a leak, puts his rifle against a tree, and George, handcuffed, grabs the rifle. The constable jumps on him, and George shoots him through the stomach. The other 2 police officers hear this. They charge back and discover that George is gone. The constable is bleeding out. He later dies, and George has made his great escape. So I think from there what happens is there's a bounty put on George's head, obviously for killing a police officer, and then he is later found a few weeks or months later in a pub, and he's knocked unconscious from behind by a patron who recognises him, and turned into police. Now, the crazy part about this whole story, if that's not crazy enough, is that George, now because he's a convicted criminal, he's not allowed to testify. At that time, convicted criminals were not allowed to testify. So Joseph, he could only be convicted for some small armed robberies, and couldn't be convicted for any of the allegations made by George. Now, shortly after George was captured, he was hung. I think within 48 hours he was hung in Melbourne, or Port Phillip. And Joseph, as I said, was sentenced again for the armed robberies that he and the other gang members committed, and was sent, I believe, to Norfolk Island. And he was a pretty ghastly character by everything that you read. So whilst he wasn't executed, hung for the crimes that he committed at Mount Alexander, he did end up killing a police officer whilst at Norfolk Island, and was later hung himself. So this is a part of Bendigo and Mount Alexander's history that for some reason hasn't been shared broadly, and well, if it has, I don't know about it. I'd love to know if you've heard about it. So next time you are going past Mount Alexander or you're in that district, just, take a look around, and you could picture a young 22-year-old effeminate young guy running through the bush handcuffed after he had killed a police officer. Or you might like to think about those, I guess I shouldn't say poor young men that were executed and burnt in a pile, but this is a part of our history. Now, I guess we all know we have a bit of a dark history in Australia, but this one is a bit more close to home, I guess, being at Mount Alexander and being in Bendigo. So hope you enjoyed this story. I certainly enjoyed it. I was fascinated by it, listening to it. So Okay, everyone. Well, I think that's the end of today's adventure. It's starting to rain a little bit heavier now, and I've got a Father's Day lunch to get to. So thanks for joining along. Hope you enjoyed the story about Mount Alexander and some of the happenings around there. Ended up with those 3 pieces, I think. So not fantastic, but good to get a little bit of yellow. I think yellow's got a little bit more sticking around one little spot. So see you guys next time, and thank you for joining along. Bye-bye. Well, you all know what it's like. You say that that's it, and then, the way back to the car, you have a little bit of a swing. So I just got this one here. There's a little bit of quartz in the back end of it there. So not going to break the bank, but that's 4, I think. So, very nice.
Home is where you start.